Marcus Washington stared at his phone as Skyline Airlines stock plummeted $700 million in real time. Just 3 days ago, he'd been humiliated, pushed, and called boy by a flight attendant. Now CEOs were calling, begging him to stop what he'd started. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. Now, let's rewind to see how one decorated veteran turned a moment of humiliation into a nationwide movement that brought a corporate giant to its knees. The prestigious military ceremony in Washington, D.C. had run longer than expected. Marcus Washington, a 43-year-old Air Force veteran with 20 years of distinguished service, checked his watch as he hurried through Ronald Reagan National Airport. His formal military uniform, adorned with multiple medals and commendations, drew respectful glances from some travelers, while others seemed to look through him as if he were invisible. After 2 decades serving his country, Marcus had just received the Distinguished Service Medal for his leadership during a critical peacekeeping mission in Eastern Europe. The ceremony had been moving, with high-ranking officials praising his exceptional service record. Now all he wanted was to get home to Atlanta, to his wife Elena and their teenage children, Zoe and Tyler. They had insisted on throwing him a small celebration, despite his protests that the award wasn't that big of a deal. Flight 372 to Atlanta now boarding, the announcement crackled over the loudspeaker. We invite our premier members, passengers requiring special assistance, and active military personnel to board first. Marcus approached the Skyline Airlines gate, his boarding pass ready in his hand. Despite wearing his formal military uniform with clearly visible medals and rank insignia, the gate agent, Brenda Summers, barely glanced at him as he waited at the priority boarding line. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely after watching 3 business-suited white passengers get waved through with friendly smiles. "I believe military personnel are invited to board at this time?" Brenda looked up with sudden suspicion, her eyes narrowing as she scanned his uniform. "Do you have proper military identification? That looks like an old uniform." Marcus blinked, in surprise. "Ma'am, this is my current formal dress uniform. I've just come from a ceremony at the Pentagon." He reached for his military ID, which he always carried. Before he could present it, Brenda called out, "Premier members and passengers, needing assistance, please come forward." She deliberately avoided eye contact with Marcus. 2 more white passengers in business attire approached the counter. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Peterson. Thank you for your loyalty." Brenda beamed, barely checking their boarding passes before waving them through. "Have a wonderful flight." Marcus stood patiently, a familiar heaviness settling in his chest. This wasn't the first time his uniform had been questioned or his service overlooked. His mind flashed back to his early days in the Air Force, when a senior officer had mistaken him for janitorial staff despite his flight lieutenant uniform, or the time he'd been asked to prove he belonged at an officer's event, while his white colleagues walked in unchallenged. From behind him, a white man in a Navy uniform approached the gate. "Thank you for your service, Commander," Brenda said immediately, her tone warm and welcoming. "Please board right away. We're honored to have you flying with us today." The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Marcus took a deep breath, maintaining his composure as he had learned to do countless times before. When the priority boarding queue had dwindled, Brenda finally turned to him. "Your boarding pass?" she asked curtly, holding out her hand. Marcus presented his boarding pass and military ID. Brenda examined both documents with unnecessary scrutiny, checking and rechecking the information as though searching for inconsistencies. "Very well," she said finally, her tone making it clear she was doing him a favor. "You may board." "Thank you," Marcus replied with the quiet dignity that had earned him respect from subordinates and superiors alike throughout his military career. As he walked down the jet bridge, Marcus reminded himself of the advice he'd given countless young black officers under his command. "Your excellence is your armor. Wear it with pride, but understand that sometimes it still won't be enough." Stepping onto the aircraft, Marcus was greeted by flight attendant Victoria Reynolds, a woman in her mid-50s with bottle blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her smile vanished as she looked him up and down. "Seat?" she asked sharply. not offering the warm welcome aboard she'd given to the passengers ahead of him. 14C aisle, Marcus replied evenly. Victoria eyed his uniform and mumbled something to her colleague, Jeffrey Wilson, a younger male flight attendant who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Down on the right, Victoria said dismissively, already turning her attention to the passenger behind Marcus. Making his way to his seat, Marcus stowed his small duffel in the overhead compartment. The flight was clearly overbooked, with passengers struggling to find space for their luggage and flight attendants rushing to help certain travelers while ignoring others. Marcus settled into his seat, checking his phone for messages from Elena. His wife had sent him a photo of the welcome home banner Zoe and Tyler had made, along with a text. "We're so proud of you. Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you." The simple message lifted his spirits. After 2 decades of service, moving his family from base to base, missing birthdays and anniversaries, he was finally transitioning to civilian life. Elena had weathered it all with strength and grace, building her own successful career as a corporate attorney while raising their children to be confident and conscientious. He was endlessly grateful for her. As the plane filled, Marcus observed the flight attendants interacting with other passengers. Victoria was all smiles with an elderly white couple across the aisle, offering to help them stow their bags and asking if they needed anything before takeoff. Meanwhile, a young black woman with a baby a few rows ahead was struggling with her diaper bag, receiving only impatient glances from the same flight attendant. The flight was delayed on the tarmac for nearly 45 minutes due to air traffic congestion. During this time, Victoria and the other attendants served water to select passengers in first class and a few in economy, consistently skipping Marcus's row even as they served white passengers seated directly in front and behind him. Marcus wasn't one to make assumptions about people's motivations, having learned through his military career that giving others the benefit of the doubt often led to better outcomes. But as the pattern continued, Victoria making eye contact with everyone in his row except him, serving the white businessman beside him while pretending not to see Marcus's raised hand, it became increasingly difficult to ignore. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely as Victoria brushed past his seat for the 3rd time. "Could I possibly get some water as well?" Victoria acted as though she hadn't heard him, continuing down the aisle to cheerfully ask a white family if they needed anything. The businessman next to Marcus, a middle-aged white man named Richard Connolly, according to the business card he'd dropped earlier, gave him a puzzled look. "That's strange," he commented. "She's been very attentive to everyone else." "It happens," Marcus replied simply, not wanting to make the man uncomfortable by explaining the reality he'd lived with his entire life. Richard frowned slightly but said nothing more, turning his attention back to his laptop. As the plane finally took off, Marcus resigned himself to a thirsty flight. He closed his eyes, thinking about the speech he'd given earlier that day to a group of cadets about perseverance and dignity in the face of adversity. The irony wasn't lost on him. The seatbelt sign had barely turned off when Victoria began bustling down the aisle with the beverage cart, starting from the front. Marcus watched as she offered drinks and snacks to each passenger, engaging in cheerful banter with some while maintaining brisk efficiency with others. When the cart reached his row, Victoria served Richard first, then leaned across to serve the woman at the window seat, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Marcus. "And for you, sir?" she asked Richard, completely ignoring Marcus's presence. "I'm fine, thank you," Richard replied, then added pointedly, "But I believe this gentleman has been trying to get a drink for some time now." Victoria's smile tightened. Without looking at Marcus, she asked flatly, "What would you like?" "Water, please," Marcus said. Victoria thrust a plastic cup and small water bottle at him without a word, nearly spilling it in her haste to move on. As the flight progressed, the pattern continued. When lunch service began, Marcus's special meal request, a simple fruit plate he'd ordered due to dietary restrictions, was mysteriously not on the manifest. When he pressed his call button to ask about it, Victoria marched down the aisle and switched it off without a word. The message was clear. Marcus Washington, despite his uniform, despite his service, despite his basic humanity, was not deserving of the same respect and attention as other passengers. It was a familiar message, one he'd heard in various forms. Throughout his life, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, but always present. As the flight approached Atlanta, Marcus reminded himself that in just a few hours, he'd be home with his family, celebrating his award and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. This flight attendant, would soon be nothing more than an unpleasant memory. Little did he know that what was about to unfold would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others, and send shockwaves through corporate America that would be felt for years to come. 2 hours into the flight from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, the cabin had settled into the drowsy rhythm of a midday journey. Most passengers were either napping, working on laptops, or watching the in-flight entertainment. Marcus Washington had been trying to review notes for a veteran support program he was developing, but his parched throat made it difficult to concentrate. He hadn't had anything to drink since before security at Reagan National, and the cabin's dry air was taking its toll. Around him, passengers sipped from water bottles and soft drinks that Victoria Reynolds and the other flight attendants had distributed to everyone except him and the few other passengers of color scattered throughout the economy section. When Victoria passed by his row again, Marcus raised his hand slightly, hoping for a more professional interaction this time. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in the respectful tone that had become second nature during his military career. "Could I please get some water when you have a moment?" Victoria's eyes flicked to him, then away, as she continued down the aisle without acknowledging his request. Marcus sighed quietly. Beside him, Richard Connolly lowered his business magazine, frowning. "Did she just ignore you again?" Richard asked. "That's ridiculous." "It's fine," Marcus replied automatically, though they both knew it wasn't. 10 minutes later, Marcus pressed his call button. It was something he rarely did, preferring not to draw attention to himself, but his thirst had become distracting. The button illuminated, casting a soft glow above his seat. A minute passed, then 5. Other call buttons were answered promptly, by Jeffrey or the third flight attendant, a woman named Lisa Chen, but Marcus's remained unacknowledged. Finally, Victoria marched down the aisle, her face set in a mask of irritation. Without a word, she reached up and switched off his call button, then turned to walk away. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice firm but controlled. "I've been trying to get some water for over an hour now." Victoria spun around, her expression hardening. "You need to be patient like everyone else," she snapped loudly enough for several rows to hear. "We're very busy." "I understand that," Marcus replied evenly. "However, I've noticed that everyone around me has been served multiple times while my requests have been ignored." Victoria's nostrils flared. "Are you accusing me of something?" Her voice rose sharply, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "I'm simply stating an observation," Marcus said, maintaining his composure. "All I'm asking for is water." "You people always think you're being singled out," Victoria hissed, quietly enough that only those in the immediate vicinity could hear. "I have a plane full of passengers to serve." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus had heard those words too many times before, always carrying the same unmistakable message of otherness, of lesser status. Across the aisle, Martha Gladwell, a retired schoolteacher in her 60s, looked up from her book in surprise. A few seats ahead, a young man discreetly pointed his phone camera toward the interaction. "I'd like to speak to the lead flight attendant, please," Marcus requested calmly. "I am the lead on this section," Victoria retorted. "And if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to take further action." Marcus reached into his pocket for his military ID. "Ma'am, I've been nothing but respectful. I simply asked for water, which is a reasonable request on a 3-hour flight." As he partially stood to retrieve his ID, Victoria suddenly placed her hand on his shoulder and shoved him backward. "Sit down," she ordered sharply. "You need to know your place, boy." The word boy echoed through the cabin. Several passengers gasped audibly. Richard Connolly's magazine slipped from his hands. Martha Gladwell's mouth fell open in shock. For Marcus, time seemed to slow. In that single word, boy, centuries of degradation, of dehumanization, of casual cruelty were compressed. He had been called many things in his life: lieutenant, captain, major, colonel, sir, Mr. Washington, dad. But the sting of being called boy by a white woman cut through. All those earned titles like a knife. With remarkable self-control, Marcus remained seated, his face a careful mask of dignity despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "I'd like your employee identification number, please," he said, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Victoria crossed her arms defensively. "I don't have to give you that. Actually, company policy requires you to provide your identification when requested by a passenger," interjected Jeffrey Wilson, who had hurried over when he heard the commotion. The younger flight attendant looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation. "Stay out of this, Jeff," Victoria snapped. "This passenger has been problematic since boarding. If he doesn't settle down, we'll have him removed when we land." Jeffrey hesitated, clearly torn between professional protocol and challenging his senior colleague. "I've done nothing wrong," Marcus stated firmly. "I would like water, and I would like your employee identification number for my formal complaint." Victoria leaned in close, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Go ahead and complain. No one will believe you over me." By now, several passengers had their phones out, recording the interaction. Richard Connolly had stood up in the aisle. "This is unacceptable," Richard said loudly. "I've been sitting next to this gentleman the entire flight, and he's been nothing but courteous while being repeatedly ignored." Victoria's face flushed red. "Sir, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us when we witness such blatant," Richard began, but was interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence ahead. Please, return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." Victoria used the announcement as an escape, hurrying back toward the galley without providing water or her employee information. Jeffrey gave Marcus an apologetic look before following. As the supposed turbulence never materialized, Marcus strongly suspected the announcement had been a convenient way to defuse the situation. The captain's timing was too perfect to be coincidental. While passengers resettled and the cabin returned to an uneasy quiet, Marcus noticed a message on his phone from an unknown number. "I have video of what just happened. That wasn't right. Let me know if you need it." Similar messages appeared from two other passengers. Marcus sent a brief "thank you" in response to each, grateful for their solidarity, but unsure what he would do with the evidence. Throughout his life and career, he had been careful about which battles to fight and which to let go. As a black man in America, particularly in the military, he had learned that responding to every slight, every injustice, would consume his life and spirit entirely. But this, being physically pushed, being called boy in public, being humiliated despite his uniform and rank, this felt different. Not just because of what had happened to him personally, but because of what it represented. The casual dehumanization that occurred every day to people who looked like him, people without medals, without rank, without witnesses filming on their phones. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the cabin seemed to intensify as Marcus sat perfectly still, processing what had just happened and what would come next. His military training had prepared him for making difficult decisions under pressure, for identifying strategic objectives and tactical approaches, for understanding when to advance and when to retreat. This, he decided, would not be a retreat. Richard Connolly leaned over, speaking softly. "I've been traveling for business for 30 years. I've never seen anything like that. It was completely uncalled for." "Thank you," Marcus replied simply. "No, really," Richard insisted. "I want you to know I'll be happy to provide a statement about what I witnessed." Martha Gladwell caught Marcus's eye from across the aisle and nodded firmly, indicating she too would stand as a witness. For the remainder of the flight, Victoria made herself scarce, delegating service in Marcus's section to Jeffrey and Lisa. Neither mentioned the incident directly, but both made sure Marcus received water and the snack he had been denied earlier. As the aircraft began its descent into Atlanta, Victoria's voice came over the intercom for the standard landing announcements. Her tone was professional, betraying none of the hostility she had displayed earlier. "We'd like to thank you for flying with Skyline today," she concluded. "We know you have a choice in airlines and we appreciate you choosing us. We'd also like to remind all passengers of the importance of following crew instructions for everyone's safety and comfort. The pointed remark wasn't lost on Marcus or the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation. It was Victoria's attempt to reframe the narrative, to cast herself as the reasonable authority figure dealing with an uncooperative passenger. But the truth had been captured on multiple devices, preserved in digital clarity. And Marcus Washington, who had spent his career analyzing intelligence and developing strategic responses, was beginning to formulate a plan. As the plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Marcus thought about Elena waiting for him at arrivals, about Zoe and Tyler at home preparing their small celebration, about the life he had built through dedication and excellence despite the obstacles placed in his path. He thought about all the times he had swallowed his anger, redirected his pain, modulated his responses to make others comfortable. He thought about the young black men and women he had mentored in the Air Force, how he had taught them to navigate systems that weren't built for them, to excel despite the additional weight they carried. And he decided that this time would be different. This time, the weight would be redistributed. This time, accountability would be demanded and received. Little did Victoria Reynolds know that her actions that day would not only change her own life but would send shockwaves through an entire corporation, ultimately costing Skyline Airlines hundreds of millions of dollars and forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the usual rush to retrieve luggage and exit. But Marcus remained seated, watching, waiting, knowing that the real journey was just beginning. As passengers began gathering their belongings and queuing in the aisle, Marcus noticed Patricia Miller, identified by her name tag as the head flight attendant, making her way toward his seat. Her expression was stern, her posture rigid with authority. "Mr. Washington?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I need to speak with you." Marcus nodded, maintaining his composure. "Of course." Patricia glanced around at the passengers watching their interaction. "There's been a complaint about your behavior during the flight." "A complaint about my behavior?" Marcus repeated incredulously. "Ma'am, I was physically pushed and called a racial slur by one of your flight attendants." Patricia's expression didn't change. "That's not my understanding of the situation. Victoria is one of our most experienced attendants, and she reports that you were combative and refused to follow crew instructions." Several passengers who had witnessed the incident made sounds of disbelief. Richard Connolly stepped into the aisle. "That's absolutely false," he stated firmly. "I was sitting right next to this gentleman. He was nothing but respectful while being repeatedly ignored and then physically assaulted by your flight attendant." Patricia barely glanced at Richard. "Sir, please stay out of this. You don't understand the full situation." "I understand what I saw with my own eyes," Richard insisted. Martha Gladwell joined in from across the aisle. "I saw it too. That flight attendant was completely out of line. She pushed him and called him, a word that should never be used." Patricia's lips thinned. "Ma'am, please return to your seat until the aircraft is fully deplaned." "I will not be silenced," Martha replied, her teacher's authority evident in her tone. "This man deserves an apology, not an accusation." Patricia turned back to Marcus, lowering her voice. "Sir, we have air marshals on board. If you continue to cause a disruption, they will get involved. I suggest you cooperate fully." The threat hung in the air, loaded with implications. Marcus was acutely aware of what could happen to a black man accused of being disruptive on an aircraft, regardless of his military rank or the injustice that had occurred. "I would like to speak with the captain," Marcus requested calmly. "The captain is busy completing post-flight procedures," Patricia replied dismissively. "We need to resolve this situation now." "What exactly needs to be resolved?" Marcus asked. "I've been sitting here quietly. I asked for water, was ignored, and then was assaulted and racially insulted by your colleague. Those are the facts." Patricia's expression hardened. "Those are your claims, sir, and frankly, they're not credible." The casual dismissal of his experience, the automatic assumption that he was lying despite multiple witnesses, was all too familiar to Marcus. How many times had black truth been dismissed in favor of white comfort? How many times had injustice been buried under paperwork and procedures? Have you ever experienced a moment where someone in authority refused to believe your truth despite clear evidence? Comment number 1 if you've ever felt that sinking feeling of being dismissed when you were completely in the right. Or hit like if you know that justice sometimes requires standing your ground even when the system is against you. Don't forget to subscribe as we continue this incredible true story of one man's fight against corporate discrimination. So what happens when those meant to ensure safety become the ones causing harm? As Marcus sat there, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed his humiliation, he faced a crucial decision. Since you refuse to address this situation properly, Marcus said evenly, I will be filing a formal complaint with Skyline's corporate offices and with the FAA regarding both the incident and your handling of it. Something flickered in Patricia's eyes, concern perhaps, or irritation at being challenged. That's your right, sir. But right now, I need you to move to a different seat while we finish deplaning. Why would I need to move? Marcus asked. My seat is right here. It's standard procedure in these situations, Patricia claimed, though Marcus strongly doubted that was true. Before he could respond, Jeffrey Wilson approached and whispered something to Patricia. She frowned, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, she said. Mr. Washington, please gather your belongings and follow me to the rear of the aircraft. Under the watchful eyes of dozens of passengers, many still recording with their phones, Marcus collected his small duffel from the overhead compartment. With dignity intact but dignity wounded, he followed Patricia to an empty row at the back of the plane. Please wait here until all other passengers have deplaned, Patricia instructed. Someone will escort you off afterward. As she walked away, Marcus heard her mutter to another crew member, These problem passengers are always so entitled. The comment, clearly meant to be overheard, was another attempt to reframe the narrative. Marcus as troublemaker, as problem, as threat, rather than as victim of discrimination and assault. Throughout the deplaning process, Marcus remained seated as instructed, maintaining his military bearing despite the humiliation of being separated from other passengers like a criminal. Several people expressed support as they passed. That was wrong, what they did to you. I've got it all on video, sir. Happy to send it to you. Thank you for your service. This is not how you should be treated. A young black boy, perhaps 10 or 11, walked past with his mother. He stared at Marcus wide-eyed, taking in the uniform, the medals, the dignified posture despite the obvious mistreatment. Marcus gave the child a reassuring nod, silently communicating a message. Hold your head high, no matter what. The boy straightened, his shoulders in response. A small but significant exchange that reminded Marcus why this fight mattered beyond his personal experience. As the final passengers deplaned, Marcus discreetly sent a text to Elena. Flight landing now. There's been an incident. I'll explain when I see you, but I'm okay. Love you. Elena's response was immediate. What happened? Should I meet you at the gate or baggage claim? Baggage claim is better, Marcus texted back. Might be delayed getting off the plane. Once the aircraft was empty except for crew, Patricia returned, with 2 men in airport security uniforms. Not air marshals as she had threatened, but still an official presence meant to intimidate. Mr. Washington, one of the security officers said, we've been asked to escort you from the aircraft. Marcus stood, maintaining his dignity. May I ask why security is necessary? I've complied with all instructions. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, whose name badge read Officer Johnson, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. Just following procedures, sir, Officer Johnson said, his tone suggesting he didn't entirely believe the necessity himself. Victoria Reynolds stood in the galley, watching with obvious satisfaction as Marcus was escorted off like a troublemaker. Jeffrey Wilson, by contrast, couldn't meet Marcus's eyes, his discomfort with the situation evident. Walking through the empty aircraft under guard, Marcus felt the weight of historical injustice pressing down on him. How many times had black men been paraded through public spaces under guard, their humanity diminished, their dignity assaulted? The parallels were not lost on him, nor was the bitter irony of it happening while he wore the uniform of the country he had served faithfully for 2 decades. As they emerged from the jet bridge into the terminal, Travelers stopped to stare at the unusual sight. A decorated military officer being escorted by security. The optics were precisely what Skyline wanted to avoid, yet they had created this spectacle themselves through their mishandling of the situation. "We'll accompany you to baggage claim," Officer Johnson informed him. "That won't be necessary," Marcus replied firmly. "Unless I'm being detained for some reason?" The officers exchanged glances again. "No, sir, you're not being detained." "Then I'll proceed to baggage claim on my own, thank you." After a moment's hesitation, they nodded. "Your bags have been flagged for additional screening," Officer Johnson added. "You'll need to wait at the special handling area." Of course they had. One final indignity, one last attempt to assert control and reinforce the message. You don't belong. You are suspect. You are less than. As the officers walked away, Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself. Then he straightened his uniform jacket, adjusted his stance to the perfect military bearing that had become second nature, and walked through the terminal with his head held high. Fellow travelers watched him pass, many nodding in respect at his uniform and medals. They couldn't know the battle he had just endured, or the war he was about to wage. But Marcus Washington knew, and as he headed toward baggage claim where Elena waited, his military strategist's mind was already mapping out the campaign ahead. The young black boy, who had seen him on the plane, was now walking with his mother toward another gate. The child stopped, turned, and saluted Marcus. Without breaking stride, Marcus returned the salute, a small act of mutual recognition and respect that affirmed what Victoria Reynolds and Patricia Miller had tried to deny: his humanity, his dignity, his worth. His phone buzzed with incoming messages, videos and contact information from witnesses, expressions of outrage and support, offers to testify to what they had seen. This evidence would form the foundation of what was to come. Marcus Washington had spent his career defending his country. Now he would use everything he had learned to hold accountable those who had forgotten that justice and dignity weren't just abstract concepts, but fundamental rights. Rights he had sworn to protect. Rights he would not surrender, not for himself and not for all those who couldn't fight back as effectively as he could. As he approached the special handling area for his flagged luggage, Marcus saw Elena waiting nearby, her expression shifting from worry to relief at the sight of him. She hurried over, embracing him tightly. "What happened?" she asked, leaning back to study his face. "A lot," Marcus replied quietly, "and it's not over yet." Little did Skyline Airlines know that this incident would soon escalate far beyond a customer service complaint. Their stock value, their public image, and their corporate culture were about to face a reckoning that would reverberate throughout the business world. The call that Marcus Washington would make, the single call that would trigger a $700 million stock crash, was less than 24 hours away. The drive from Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport to their Brookhaven home gave Marcus enough time to brief Elena on what had transpired during the flight. As a corporate attorney specializing in employment law and compliance, Elena listened, with increasing alarm, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly absorbing the details with professional precision. "They pushed you?" she repeated, her knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Physically pushed you and called you boy? In 2025? On a commercial aircraft full of witnesses?" Marcus nodded, his expression somber. "Multiple passengers recorded. 3 have already sent me their videos." Elena shook her head in disbelief. "This isn't just poor customer service or even garden variety discrimination, Marcus. This is assault. This is a civil rights violation. This is a PR nightmare waiting to explode in their faces." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "That's why I wanted to discuss our approach with you before taking any action. This could get complicated quickly." Elena's analytical mind was already racing ahead. "Skyline has had issues before. Remember that incident last year with the Muslim family removed from their flight? Or the lawsuit from that group of Latino passengers in 2023? "I remember," Marcus confirmed. "There seems to be a pattern." "Patterns are legally significant," Elena noted, turning onto their tree-lined street. "Individual incidents can be dismissed. as misunderstandings or rogue employees. Pattern suggests systemic issues, which is where companies become truly vulnerable. As they pulled into their driveway, they could see Zoe and Tyler through the front window, decorating the living room with welcome home banners and balloons. The sight momentarily lightened Marcus's mood, a reminder of what truly mattered in his life. "Let's not mention this to the kids tonight," Marcus suggested. "This is supposed to be a celebration." Elena nodded in agreement, but added, "They'll need to know eventually, especially if this escalates the way I think it might." Inside, 17-year-old Zoe and 15-year-old Tyler rushed to greet their father with hugs. "Dad, congratulations on your medal," Zoe exclaimed, her eyes bright with pride. "We made your favorite dinner," Tyler added. "Well, Mom ordered it, but we set the table." "That's my boy," Marcus laughed, ruffling Tyler's hair. For the next few hours, the Washington family celebrated Marcus's military honor, sharing stories and laughter around the dining table. Only after the kids had gone to bed did Marcus and Elena retreat to his home office to review the evidence and formulate their strategy. 3 different video angles, Elena murmured as they watched the recordings on Marcus's laptop, all clearly showing Victoria pushing you and using a racial slur. "The airline doesn't have a leg to stand on legally. But they'll try," Marcus predicted, drawing on his years of experience with institutional resistance to accountability. "They'll claim I was being difficult, that Victoria felt threatened, that it was a misunderstanding taken out of context." "Let them try," Elena replied, her professional confidence evident. "With this evidence and these witnesses, they'll be digging themselves deeper with every denial." Their planning session was interrupted by the doorbell. Marcus checked the security camera feed to see Darnell Jackson standing on their front porch, holding a bottle of champagne. "It's Darnell," Marcus told Elena with a smile. Should have known he'd stop by. Darnell and Marcus had served together in the Air Force for 15 years before Darnell transitioned to the private sector, becoming a successful technology executive who now sat on several corporate boards. Their friendship had endured through deployments, personal challenges, and career changes. "The man of the hour," Darnell exclaimed when Marcus opened the door, pulling him into a bear hug. "Distinguished Service Medal. That's huge, brother. Come in, Marcus welcomed him, leading the way to the office where Elena was still reviewing the videos. "Elena, beautiful as ever," Darnell greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "What's all this? I thought we were celebrating, but you two look like you're planning a military operation." The light mood shifted as Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. "Something happened on the flight home," Marcus explained, gesturing for Darnell to take a seat. As Darnell watched the videos, his expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to cold anger. "Tell me you're taking action against these people," he said when the last clip ended, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We're developing our strategy now," Elena replied. "This goes beyond a simple complaint." Darnell set down his champagne glass, his celebratory mood completely evaporated. "You know I sit on the board of Meridian Capital Partners, right?" Marcus nodded. Darnell had joined the board of the major investment firm 2 years earlier, a prestigious position that recognized his business acumen. "What you probably don't know," Darnell continued, leaning forward, "is that Meridian holds a significant stake in Global Air Group, which is Skyline's parent company." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "How significant?" "About 8%, Darnell replied. "Enough to have considerable influence, especially when combined with other institutional investors who might share our concerns." The implication hung in the air for a moment before Marcus spoke. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Darnell said carefully, "that justice can be pursued through multiple channels simultaneously. Legal action, yes. Media coverage, absolutely. But also corporate governance and financial pressure." Elena was already nodding, her legal mind connecting the dots. "Shareholder value is affected by reputation risk and potential litigation exposure. If other major investors became concerned about Skyline's liability and cultural issues." "Exactly," Darnell confirmed. "The financial markets respond to risk, and a company with documented patterns of discrimination represents significant risk." Marcus absorbed this information, considering the implications. Throughout his military career, he had learned to approach problems from multiple angles, to identify leverage points and strategic advantages. What had happened to him on that flight wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a larger systemic failure that affected countless other travelers. "I don't want this to be about revenge," Marcus said finally. "It needs to be about accountability and change." "It can be both," Elena assured him. "We can address your specific incident while pushing for structural reforms that will prevent this from happening to others." Darnell pulled out his phone. "I have contacts at several major news outlets. One call, and this story gets national attention by tomorrow morning." "Hold on," Marcus cautioned. "Before we go public, we need to be clear about our objectives and prepared for the backlash." Elena nodded in agreement. "If we do this, Marcus will be cast as either a hero or a troublemaker. You know how these stories get spun. Angry black man versus innocent white woman. The fact that you're a decorated veteran will help, but we need to be strategic about the narrative." The three spent the next hour outlining a multifaceted approach: legal, media, corporate, and financial pressure points that could be activated, in sequence for maximum effect. "What about the Black Business Alliance?" Darnell suggested, referring to the influential organization where Elena held a leadership position. "Already thinking about it," Elena confirmed. "They've been looking for a case study to highlight how discrimination impacts economic opportunities. This could be it." As their strategy took shape, Marcus felt a momentary hesitation. "Part of me is wondering if this is worth the hassle, whether I should just file a complaint and move on." "Would you give that advice to the young officers you've mentored?" Elena asked gently. "To walk away when they're mistreated?" Marcus thought about the young black boy on the plane who had saluted him, the next generation who would face these same battles if nothing changed. "No, I wouldn't." Darnell's phone buzzed with an incoming email. He glanced at it, then looked up with a grim smile. "I just asked my assistant to pull some background research on Skyline. Preliminary results are interesting. They've had 27 discrimination complaints filed with the Department of Transportation in the past 3 years, significantly higher than industry average." "Patterns," Elena murmured, the lawyer in her recognizing the legal significance. "And here's something particularly relevant." Darnell continued, scrolling through the data. "Despite their public Support Our Troops marketing campaign, they rank last among major carriers in customer satisfaction among military personnel. There's a Veterans Association survey from last year showing Skyline as the least preferred airline for service members." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's significant." "It's more than significant. It's hypocrisy," Darnell said. "They're using military service as a marketing tool while mistreating actual service members." Their strategic session continued late, into the night, with Elena creating a secure digital folder to organize evidence, testimonies, and research. Around midnight, Marcus's phone chimed with an email notification from Skyline Airlines. "Dear Mr. Washington, we regret that your experience with us today did not meet expectations. As a gesture of goodwill, we've added a $250 flight voucher to your account, valid for 1 year. We value your business and hope to serve you better in the future." The generic automated response made no mention of the specific incident, the assault, or the racial slur. It was corporate damage control at its most minimal, an attempt to make the problem go away with the least possible effort or admission of wrongdoing. "They have no idea what's coming," Darnell remarked after Marcus showed them the email. "Let's make sure we do this right," Marcus cautioned, "by the book with precision and purpose." "Just like you've done everything in your career," Elena agreed, squeezing his hand. Before ending their strategy session, Marcus drafted a formal complaint to Skyline's Customer Relations Department, meticulously documenting every aspect of the incident without emotional language or exaggeration. The facts spoke for themselves. Within an hour, he received an automated response. "Thank you for your feedback. A customer relations specialist will review your concerns within 5 to 7 business days." The next morning, an email arrived from Patricia Miller, the head flight attendant who had threatened Marcus with air marshals. It was brief and defensive. "Mr. Washington, we have reviewed your complaint and spoken with our flight crew. Our investigation indicates that you were non-compliant with crew instructions and behaved aggressively when addressed. While we regret any misunderstanding, safety is our primary concern, and our attendants are trained to respond appropriately to potential disruptions. We consider this matter closed. Regards, Patricia Miller, Senior Flight Attendant, Skyline Airlines." Elena read the email over Marcus's shoulder, her expression darkening. "They're doubling down. This is actually perfect for us. They've created a paper trail of denial and victim blaming that will look terrible when the evidence becomes public." "So what's our next move?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "You make one. Phone call," Darnell replied, "to someone who can set everything in motion." As Marcus reached for his phone, he thought about all the people who had faced similar treatment without his advantages, without a legal expert for a spouse, without a well-connected friend, without video evidence, without witnesses willing to speak up. His fight wasn't just about one incident on one flight. It was about changing a system that allowed such incidents to happen with impunity. The number he dialed would connect him to someone who could amplify his voice and leverage his experience to create change that would extend far beyond his personal situation. It was time to make that call. At precisely 0800 hours the next morning, Marcus Washington sat at his home office desk, phone in hand, his military discipline evident in his perfect posture and focused expression. He dialed a number few civilians would have access to, a direct line to Admiral James Peterson at the Pentagon. Admiral Peterson had been Marcus's commanding officer during a critical peacekeeping mission in Eastern Europe, where Marcus's diplomatic skills and strategic thinking had prevented a potentially catastrophic escalation. The Admiral had been the one to recommend Marcus for the Distinguished Service Medal, and their mutual respect ran deep. "Admiral Peterson's office," answered a crisp, professional voice. "This is Colonel Marcus Washington. Is the Admiral available?" "Colonel Washington, congratulations on your medal. The Admiral mentioned you'd be receiving it this week. Please hold while I connect you." Moments later, Admiral Peterson's familiar baritone came through the line. "Marcus, I was just telling my staff about your ceremony. How does it feel to finally be recognized for that mess you cleaned up in Novi Grad?" "It feels good, sir," Marcus replied, "though I wish the recognition extended to commercial flights as well." "What do you mean?" The Admiral's tone shifted immediately, sensing the seriousness beneath Marcus's measured words. Over the next 10 minutes, Marcus provided a detailed account of the incident on Skyline Airlines, speaking with the precision and objectivity that had characterized his military briefings. When he finished, there was silence on the line, followed by a single quiet word: "Unacceptable." Admiral Peterson, known for his calm demeanor even in crisis situations, continued with barely contained anger. "You were in uniform, with your medals clearly displayed, after receiving one of our highest honors?" "Yes, sir." "And they still treated you like this?" The Admiral's voice reflected not just personal outrage on behalf of a colleague, but institutional offense, an affront to the military itself. "The airline's response suggests this isn't an isolated incident," Marcus added. "They're doubling down, claiming I was the aggressor." "Forward me everything you have," the Admiral instructed. "Videos, witness statements, the airline's responses. Everything. I'm connecting you with the Military Affairs Committee immediately. This goes beyond a customer service issue, Marcus. This is about respecting the uniform and those who wear it." "Thank you, sir. That's exactly why I called. This isn't just about me." "No, it certainly isn't," Admiral Peterson agreed grimly. "Expect calls from the committee within the hour. And Marcus, you did the right thing bringing this to me. This situation requires an institutional response." As promised, within 45 minutes, Marcus received calls from 3 members of the Military Affairs Committee, all expressing outrage at his treatment and requesting permission to review the evidence. By noon, the committee had issued a formal request for information to Skyline Airlines regarding their policies and procedures for military personnel. Meanwhile, Elena had activated her own professional network. As a partner track attorney at Harrington and Pierce, one of Atlanta's most prestigious corporate law firms. She had connections throughout the business world. A series of carefully placed calls to fellow attorneys, diversity executives, and corporate compliance officers ensured that the incident would be discussed in boardrooms across the country. The legal angle alone would be significant, Elena explained to Marcus as they reviewed their strategy over lunch. But when combined with the military dimension and the corporate governance questions Darnell is raising, we're creating pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. Their son, Tyler, a tech-savvy teenager who managed his school's social media accounts, offered his assistance in creating a private social media profile highlighting Marcus's military achievements and community service. "Not to brag, Dad," Tyler said, "but to provide context. People need to understand who they were disrespecting. It makes the contrast more powerful." Zoe, who headed her high school's media club, helped draft a clear, factual account of the incident that would be ready if and when the story went public. No emotional language, she noted, showcasing her growing understanding of effective communication. Just the facts, which are damning enough on their own. By mid-afternoon, the first media inquiry arrived, not from a mainstream outlet, but from Veterans Today, a respected publication serving the military community. A journalist named Rebecca Chen had received a tip about the incident and was seeking comment. "This is sooner than we expected," Marcus noted, showing the email to Elena and Darnell, who had returned to coordinate their efforts. "The military community moves fast when one of their own is mistreated," Darnell observed. "Should we respond?" Marcus considered the options. "Yes, but strictly with facts. No inflammatory language, no demands. Just what happened, documented clearly." The article appeared on Veterans Today's website the following morning. Decorated colonel assaulted, racially insulted on Skyline flight after receiving Distinguished Service Medal. The piece included Marcus's military background, a factual account of the incident, and the statement that Skyline had dismissed his complaint despite video evidence. Within hours, the story was picked up by military forums and veteran groups across social media. By midday, it had been shared thousands of times, with many veterans and active duty personnel expressing outrage and vowing to boycott the airline. Skyline's social media accounts were flooded with comments from military members and their families. The company's stock showed its first tremors, dropping 3% by market close as investors sensed potential trouble brewing. The airline's initial response was a hastily issued statement, claiming the incident was isolated and under investigation, contradicting their earlier email to Marcus, stating they considered the matter closed. That evening, one of the passenger videos was obtained by a national news network, which broadcast it during primetime with the headline, "Shocking Treatment of Military Veteran on Commercial Flight." The video clearly showed Victoria Reynolds pushing Marcus and calling him boy, contradicting Skyline's characterization of events. Social media users quickly identified Victoria from previous complaints posted online, revealing a history of customer service issues that the airline had apparently ignored. By the next morning, the story had expanded beyond military publications to mainstream media. Skyline's CEO Thomas Williams appeared on a morning news program, attempting to downplay the incident. "While we regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred," Williams said, his expression more annoyed than contrite. "We need to remember that our flight attendants have a difficult job maintaining order and safety on aircraft. There are always two sides to every story." The interviewer, visibly taken aback by this dismissive approach, responded, "But Mr. Williams, there are videos showing your employee pushing Colonel Washington and using a racial slur. How does that maintain safety?" Williams's uncomfortable pause spoke volumes. "We're still investigating the full context of the interaction." His dismissive attitude backfired spectacularly, intensifying public outrage rather than diffusing it. By noon, 3 major military organizations had announced they would no longer book travel with Skyline for their events or personnel. The Pentagon's Military Affairs Committee issued a statement expressing grave concern over the treatment of uniformed service members on commercial carriers, particularly recent incidents involving Skyline Airlines. Several major corporations began quietly reviewing their business travel contracts with Skyline, prompted by inquiries from their diversity and inclusion officers, many of whom had received personal calls from Elena Washington. Darnell's influence was equally significant. As a board member of Meridian Capital Partners, he had raised concerns about Skyline's handling of the incident during an emergency conference call. "This isn't just an ethical issue," Darnell told his fellow board members. "It's a material risk to our investment. A company culture that allows this behavior represents significant liability exposure and reputational damage." Meridian's analysts issued an internal memo questioning Skyline's leadership and corporate culture, which quickly leaked to financial media. By the third day after the incident, Skyline's stock had dropped 8%, representing hundreds of millions in lost market value. The company's crisis management team, now recognizing the seriousness of the situation, reached out to Marcus with a settlement offer. "They're offering $250,000 and a public apology," Elena told Marcus after reviewing the proposal, "in exchange for your silence and agreement not to pursue legal action." Marcus shook his head firmly. "This isn't about money. It's about accountability and change. They still don't understand that." "What do you want?" Darnell asked. "What's your end goal here?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I want systematic changes, training programs, accountability measures, independent oversight. I want them to address the culture that allowed this to happen, not just manage the PR crisis it created." Elena nodded. "I'll draft a counter-proposal focusing on structural reforms rather than financial compensation." As Marcus's response was delivered to Skyline's legal team, another pivotal moment unfolded. The young black boy who had saluted Marcus on the plane was interviewed on a youth-oriented news program, describing how seeing a decorated black officer being mistreated had affected him. "I always wanted to be in the military like my grandpa," the boy, identified as 12-year-old Jamal Turner, explained. "Seeing how they treated Colonel Washington made me wonder if that's how they'd treat me too. But then I saw how he handled it, with dignity and strength. That taught me something important." The interview, which quickly went viral, added a powerful emotional dimension to the story. It was no longer just about one incident or one man's experience. It was about the message being sent to the next generation about the value of their service and their humanity. By the end of the week, Skyline's stock had dropped 12%, and CEO Thomas Williams was scheduled to appear before the Military Affairs Committee to explain his company's policies regarding service members and their record on discrimination complaints. The phone call Marcus had made to Admiral Peterson, the one call that had set everything in motion, had created ripples that were rapidly becoming waves, threatening to crash over Skyline Airlines with devastating force. And Marcus Washington, who had spent his career serving his country quietly and effectively, found himself at the center of a movement for accountability that was growing larger by the day. In the plush executive boardroom on the top floor of Skyline's headquarters in Chicago, emergency lights glowed red on every attendee's phone as stock alerts pinged continuously. The company's shares had dropped another 12% in a single day, bringing the total market value loss to nearly $500 million in less than a week. CEO Thomas Williams slammed his hand on the polished mahogany table. "How did we let this spiral so completely out of control?" It was one interaction with one passenger on one flight. Chief Legal Officer Stephanie Vaughn cleared her throat. "With all due respect, Thomas, it was a uniformed military officer being physically assaulted and racially insulted by our employee, on video in front of multiple witnesses after receiving a Distinguished Service Medal. And our initial response was to blame him and dismiss his complaint." Victoria said he was being aggressive, Williams insisted, though with noticeably less conviction than in previous discussions. "The videos show otherwise," Stephanie replied evenly. "All three angles clearly show Colonel Washington remained seated and spoke calmly throughout the interaction. Victoria, on the other hand, pushed him and called him boy loud enough for half the cabin to hear." Chief Communications Officer Brendan Murphy interjected, "The military angle is killing us. We've lost contracts with the Veterans Affairs Office, 3 military support organizations, and the Pentagon itself has advised service members to consider alternative carriers pending their review. And now we're hearing rumors of corporate travel managers putting us on hold," added Chief Revenue Officer Lisa Zhang. "Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and Microsoft have all inquired about early termination clauses in their corporate contracts. Williams looked around the table at his executive team, searching for allies and finding none. So we've put Victoria on administrative leave. Isn't that enough? It's too little. Too late, Stephanie said. And the fact that you're still questioning whether we should have done more is exactly the problem. The public sees this as a pattern of behavior that starts at the top. The tension in the room was palpable as Williams absorbed this implied criticism of his leadership. What about Patricia Miller? She was just following protocol for disruptive passengers. There was no protocol that justified her actions, Stephanie countered. She threatened a passenger with air marshals despite multiple witnesses stating he had done nothing wrong. She's been sent to emergency diversity training, but frankly, her position is also untenable. Chief Human Resources Officer Daniel Ramirez spoke up for the first time. The internal situation is deteriorating as well. We've had 16 employees leak concerns to media about our corporate culture in the past 3 days. Morale is plummeting, and our recruiting efforts have effectively stopped. No one wants to work for an airline being described as systemically discriminatory. The Military Affairs Committee hearing is scheduled for next week, Brendan added grimly. They're calling it discrimination in the skies, the treatment of service members on commercial aircraft. But make no mistake, it's about us specifically. And Meridian Capital Partners is making noise about shareholder action if we don't demonstrate meaningful change, Lisa noted. They hold 8% of our stock, and they're in discussions with other institutional investors about coordinated pressure. Williams loosened his tie, the weight of the crisis visibly affecting him. Have we tried reaching out to Washington directly, offering a settlement? He declined our initial offer, Stephanie confirmed. His response through counsel was that this isn't about money, but about systematic reform. He's presented a detailed proposal for structural changes to our training, complaint procedures, oversight mechanisms, and corporate governance. Which we should seriously consider, Daniel added. From an HR perspective, many of his suggestions would actually improve our culture and operations. Williams scowled. So one passenger gets to dictate corporate policy now? This is extortion. This is accountability, Stephanie corrected firmly. And he's not alone. We've identified at least 27 similar complaints in the past 3 years that were dismissed or mishandled. Colonel Washington just happens to have the resources, connections, and evidence to force the issue. The conversation was interrupted by Williams's assistant entering the boardroom with an urgent message. Sir, Admiral James Peterson is on the line from the Pentagon. He's requesting to speak with you immediately. Williams blanched. The involvement of such a high-ranking military official signaled that the situation had escalated beyond anything they had anticipated. Take it in your office, Stephanie advised. And Thomas, remember that this call is likely to become part of the official record. Choose your words carefully. As Williams left to take the call, the remaining executives exchanged grim looks. He still doesn't get it, does he? Daniel murmured. No, Stephanie agreed. He thinks this is a PR problem that money can solve, not a cultural issue that requires genuine change. How many of you have seen leaders fail to understand a crisis because they're viewing it through the wrong lens? Comment number 1 if you've witnessed corporate denial in action, or hit like if you believe true accountability requires admitting mistakes and making real changes. Subscribe to see how Skyline's desperate attempts to control the narrative continue to backfire in spectacular fashion. The question remains, when does a crisis become terminal for a company's leadership? As Skyline's stock continues its freefall, the answer might come sooner than anyone expected. Meanwhile, across town in a significantly less opulent conference room, Marcus Washington sat with Elena, Darnell, and Admiral Peterson's liaison officer, reviewing the rapidly evolving situation. The Admiral's call to Williams should be happening right about now, Lieutenant Commander Sophia Reyes noted, checking her watch. He's prepared to be quite direct about the Pentagon's concerns. How direct? Darnell asked with a slight smile. Let's just say the Admiral suggested I step out of his office before he placed the call, Sophia replied. He doesn't typically use colorful language, but when he does, it's memorable. Marcus nodded, appreciating his former commanding officer's support. The committee hearing next week will be crucial. They've asked me to testify. "You'll be excellent," Elena assured him. Clear, factual, and focused on systematic improvements, rather than personal grievances. Skyline's trying to position this as one rogue employee and one isolated incident, Darnell noted, scrolling through media reports on his tablet. But that narrative's falling apart as more people come forward. Indeed, since Marcus's story had gained national attention, dozens of passengers had shared similar experiences of discrimination on Skyline flights. More concerning for the airline, several current and former employees had broken ranks to describe a toxic corporate culture that enabled and sometimes encouraged such behavior. Victoria Reynolds has been identified in 8 previous complaints, Sophia confirmed, referencing a dossier compiled by military intelligence. All were dismissed with minimal investigation. Patricia Miller was her supervisor in 6 of those cases. Suggesting a pattern of protection and cover-up, Elena observed, making notes for the upcoming hearing. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He excused himself to take it in the hallway. "Colonel Washington? This is Thomas Williams, CEO of Skyline Airlines." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by the direct contact. "Mr. Williams, I wasn't expecting to hear from you personally." "Yes, well, extraordinary circumstances," Williams replied, his attempt at conviviality falling flat. "I wanted to express my personal regret about your experience on our airline. It's not representative of our values or the service we strive to provide." "With all due respect, Mr. Williams, the evidence suggests otherwise," Marcus responded evenly. "Your company's initial response was to blame me and dismiss my complaint, which aligns with how you've handled dozens of similar incidents." There was a pause before Williams continued, his tone less friendly. "I'm trying to resolve this situation amicably, Colonel. We're prepared to offer significant compensation and a public apology. As my attorney has already communicated, this isn't about money," Marcus stated firmly. "This is about systematic change. Your company has a documented pattern of discrimination that needs to be addressed through structural reforms, not cash settlements." "That's an overreach," Williams said, his frustration evident. "You had one bad experience. I had one. Experience that exemplifies a pattern affecting many others who lack the platform to demand accountability," Marcus corrected. "The fact that you're still characterizing this as an isolated incident, rather than acknowledging the systemic issues at play, confirms that we're approaching this correctly." The conversation continued for several tense minutes, with Williams alternating between conciliatory offers and thinly veiled suggestions that Marcus was overreacting. Throughout, Marcus maintained his calm, professional demeanor, neither raising his voice nor yielding ground. When he returned to the conference room, Elena looked up expectantly. "Williams?" Marcus nodded, trying to manage the crisis without addressing the cause. He still doesn't understand what this is about. "Their quarterly earnings call is tomorrow," Darnell noted. "Financial analysts are preparing questions about the incident and its impact on their business model. It's going to be brutal." "Good," Sophia said firmly. "Sometimes financial pressure is the only language corporate leadership understands." The earnings call proved to be the disaster Darnell had predicted. Williams and his executive team faced relentless questioning about the incident, their response, and the broader implications for company culture and operations. "How do you reconcile your public marketing campaign supporting military personnel with the documented mistreatment of a decorated officer?" demanded one analyst. "Can you quantify the financial impact of lost contracts with military organizations and corporate clients?" asked another. "What specific steps are you taking to address what appears to be a pattern of discriminatory practices?" inquired a third. Williams's responses were defensive and vague, focusing on the company's ongoing investigation and commitment to service excellence without addressing the fundamental issues at hand. By the call's end, Skyline stock had dropped another 5% in real-time trading. Adding to the company's woes, their hastily conceived "We Support Our Troops" advertising campaign, rushed into production as a damage control measure, backfired spectacularly when veterans groups pointed out the hypocrisy of such messaging while the company was actively fighting against accountability for mistreating a service member. The situation deteriorated further when anonymous employees leaked internal emails showing that Skyline's leadership had been aware of discrimination complaints for years, but had systematically downplayed or dismissed them to avoid costly reforms and potential liability. Former staff members began describing Skyline's internal culture as toxic and retaliatory, with one ex-manager telling a business publication, "Anyone who raised concerns about discrimination or unequal treatment was labeled a troublemaker and sidelined." The message from leadership was clear: protect the company image at all costs, even if it meant ignoring real problems. Competing airlines, sensing opportunity in Skyline's crisis, launched inclusive marketing campaigns highlighting their commitment to respect and dignity for all passengers, with special programs for military personnel. As the company's stock price continued its downward spiral, additional scrutiny led to the resurfacing of past discrimination lawsuits that had been quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. While the specifics remained confidential, the ECMA pattern was damning. 17 settlements in 5 years, all involving minority passengers removed from flights or denied service. By the end of the week, Skyline's market value had plummeted by over $600 million. Investment analysts downgraded the stock from hold to sell, citing significant governance and cultural concerns that present material risks to future performance. In a last-ditch effort to stem the bleeding, Williams appeared on a business news program to defend his company. Instead of demonstrating contrition or a commitment to meaningful change, he blamed woke culture and social media mobs for the crisis, claiming Skyline was being unfairly targeted. The interview was universally panned, with commentators from across the political spectrum criticizing Williams's failure to address the substantive issues or take responsibility for his company's actions. As Marcus watched the interview from his home office, he felt no satisfaction in Williams's self-destruction or the company's financial troubles. His goal had never been revenge or financial gain. It had been accountability and change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had faced similar treatment without the resources to fight back. The power of the call he had made, the connections it had activated, the pressure it had created, the movement it had sparked, had exceeded even his strategic expectations. But the true test would come in the days ahead, as Skyline faced a decision point that would determine its future: meaningful reform or continued denial. For Marcus Washington, the decorated officer who had spent his career serving others, the Iowa path forward was clear. The campaign for justice was approaching its most critical phase, and he was prepared to see it through to completion. The morning financial reports hit like a tsunami. Skyline's stock had plummeted another 15% after CEO Thomas Williams's disastrous television interview, bringing the total market value loss to nearly $650 million in just over a week. Trading was temporarily halted after triggering circuit breakers designed to prevent panic selling. In a development that sent shockwaves through the corporate world, Pioneer Global Investments, one of the largest institutional shareholders in Skyline's parent company, announced it was divesting its entire position, citing irreconcilable concerns about cultural and leadership deficiencies that present material risks to long-term value. The announcement came as a devastating blow to Skyline's already battered reputation and market position. Pioneer managed over $1.2 trillion assets worldwide, and their investment decisions were closely watched by the market. Their divestment was not just a financial maneuver, but a powerful statement about corporate ethics and accountability. For Thomas Williams, who had staked his career on aggressive growth and cost-cutting measures, often at the expense of employee training and customer experience, the Pioneer divestment represented a potential death knell for his leadership. The Skyline Board of Directors, which had initially backed Williams' handling of the crisis, now faced intense pressure from remaining institutional investors to take decisive action. Board Chairman Robert Caldwell, a veteran airline executive with decades of industry experience, began quietly reaching out to individual board members to gauge support for a leadership change. Meanwhile, Marcus Washington was facing his own challenges. As his campaign for accountability gained national attention, he had become both a hero to many and a target for others. Conservative commentators questioned his motives, suggesting he was exaggerating the incident for financial gain or attention. Online trolls circulated out-of-context photos and fabricated stories attempting to discredit him. "It's a classic playbook," Elena observed as they reviewed the latest wave of attacks over breakfast. "When they can't deny the facts, They try to destroy the messenger. Marcus nodded, unsurprised but still disheartened by the vitriol. What they don't understand is that this was never about me personally. It's about a systemic problem that affects thousands of people who don't have the platform to fight back. Speaking of platforms, Elena said, sliding her tablet across the table. You've been invited to testify before Congress next week. The House Committee on Transportation has scheduled hearings on discrimination in commercial aviation. Marcus studied the formal invitation. This elevates the conversation beyond Skyline to industry-wide practices. That's important. It also means more public exposure, Elena cautioned. The attacks will intensify. I know, Marcus said quietly. But backing down now would send the wrong message to everyone who's experienced similar treatment without recourse. Across town, in a development that would significantly impact the unfolding situation, a group of current and former Skyline employees had gathered in a hotel conference room, organized through secure messaging channels to protect themselves from potential retaliation. They represented a cross-section of the airline's workforce: flight attendants, gate agents, baggage handlers, and administrative staff, united by shared experiences of discrimination and a desire for meaningful change. Marcus and Elena had been invited to meet with this coalition, which called itself Accountability in Aviation. The group had been collecting testimonies and documentation of discriminatory practices at Skyline and other airlines for months, before Marcus's incident had catapulted the issue into the national spotlight. Your experience wasn't an anomaly. Colonel Washington, explained Tanya Rodriguez, a former Skyline flight attendant who had left the company after reporting harassment. It's part of a pattern that starts with hiring practices, continues through training, and is reinforced by management at every level. Michael Chen, a current gate agent who was risking his job by speaking out, added, "The problems go beyond individual biases. It's about policies that enable discrimination and a complaint system designed to protect the company, not address legitimate concerns." For nearly 3 hours, Marcus and Elena listened to story after story from employees who had witnessed or experienced discrimination against passengers and within the workforce itself. Black employees passed over for promotion despite superior qualifications. Latino passengers subjected to additional, random screening. Muslim crew members assigned to less desirable routes after requesting religious accommodations. We've been documenting everything, Tanya explained, displaying a meticulously organized database of incidents, dates, witnesses, and outcomes. But until now, we haven't had enough visibility or leverage to force systemic change. By the end of the meeting, the coalition had formally invited Marcus to serve as an advisory member, leveraging his military leadership experience and newly prominent platform to amplify their efforts for industry-wide reform. This isn't just about Skyline anymore, Marcus told Elena as they drove home. It's about transforming practices across the entire industry. That's a much bigger battle, Elena noted, always the pragmatic strategist. It's the right battle, Marcus replied, his resolve strengthening, and we have the momentum to fight it effectively. As the Washington family prepared for the congressional hearing, unexpected developments continued to unfold at Skyline headquarters. Victoria Reynolds, who had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, gave an unauthorized interview to a sympathetic online publication, claiming she was being scapegoated for company-wide issues. "I've been with Skyline for 22 years, she stated. Suddenly I'm being thrown under the bus for following the exact protocols I was trained to implement. If they're saying I did something wrong, then the entire company is culpable because this is how we were instructed to handle problem passengers." Her interview, intended to shift blame to corporate leadership, instead confirmed the systemic nature of the discrimination that passengers like Marcus had experienced. Victoria's contradictory statements, simultaneously denying wrongdoing while admitting to practices that were inherently discriminatory, further damaged Skyline's already tattered credibility. The company's customer service department reported being overwhelmed with cancellations, with bookings down 35% compared to the same period the previous year. Travel agencies were steering clients toward other carriers, citing reputational concerns and service reliability issues with Skyline. Against this backdrop of mounting corporate crisis, Marcus Washington prepared for his congressional testimony. Working with Elena Darnell and communications experts from the Military Affairs Committee, he crafted a statement that was factual, measured, and focused on systemic reform rather than personal grievance. When the day of the hearing arrived, the contrast between Marcus and the airline executives testifying alongside him could not have been more stark. Dressed in his formal military uniform, with decorations that reflected his distinguished service, Marcus projected dignity, integrity, and calm authority. The airline representatives, by contrast, appeared defensive and evasive, relying on corporate jargon and carefully parsed statements that acknowledged concerns without admitting fault. Marcus's testimony was powerful in its restraint and clarity. Without emotional embellishment, he recounted his experience on Skyline Airlines, contextualized it within broader patterns of discrimination, and outlined specific, actionable recommendations for industry-wide reform. "This isn't about one incident or one airline," he concluded. "It's about ensuring that all Americans can travel with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, religion, or background. It's about holding corporations accountable not just to their shareholders, but to the diverse public they serve. And it's about living up to the principles of equality and justice that I and countless others have sworn to defend." The committee members, spanning the political spectrum, responded with unusual unanimity in their praise for Marcus's testimony and their condemnation of the practices he had exposed. Even representatives typically skeptical of discrimination, claims were moved by the clear evidence and Marcus's evident integrity. As video clips of his testimony circulated across social media platforms, the hashtag #IStandWithMarcus gained traction worldwide, with celebrities and public figures endorsing his call for accountability and reform. Military veterans shared their own experiences of discrimination, creating a powerful chorus of voices that could not be easily dismissed. Competing airlines, sensing both a moral imperative and a business opportunity, began announcing new training, protocols, and accountability measures, explicitly using Skyline's failures as a cautionary tale. Several carriers launched Respect in the Skies initiatives, promising zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior and independent oversight of customer complaints. As public pressure mounted and Skyline's financial situation deteriorated, Board E Chairman Robert Caldwell reached out to Marcus through a mutual connection, requesting a private meeting. In a discreet conference room at Atlanta's Whitley Hotel, Caldwell, a silver-haired industry veteran with 40 years of airline experience, spoke with surprising candor. "Colonel Washington, I want to begin by offering my personal apology for what you experienced on our airline. It was inexcusable and reflects problems that, I must admit, I've been too slow to acknowledge and address." Marcus nodded, appreciating the straightforward approach but reserving judgment on Caldwell's sincerity. "I've been on the board for 15 years, Caldwell continued, and I bear responsibility for the culture that allowed this incident and others like it to occur. While I can't change the past, I am committed to transforming our company moving forward, if it's not already too late." "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked. "I'd like to discuss your reform proposal in detail," Caldwell replied. "The board is meeting tomorrow to vote on significant leadership changes and a comprehensive restructuring plan. Your input could be invaluable in shaping that plan." "Why should I trust that this isn't just another crisis management tactic?" Marcus challenged. "Your CEO is still publicly dismissing my experience and attacking my credibility." Caldwell's expression darkened. "Thomas Williams will not be CEO after tomorrow's board meeting. His handling of this situation has been the final demonstration of a leadership approach that has damaged our company's culture, reputation, and financial stability." The frankness of this statement, which Caldwell surely knew could create legal complications if disclosed, signaled a level of seriousness that Marcus found compelling. "I'm willing to discuss reforms," Marcus said after careful consideration. "But any plan must include independent oversight with real authority, transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and resolutions, and meaningful consequences for violations at all levels of the organization." Over the next 3 hours, Marcus shared the comprehensive reform proposal he had developed with input from the Accountability in Aviation Coalition, legal experts, and diversity consultants. The document was far more detailed and substantive than typical corporate diversity initiatives, with specific metrics, accountability mechanisms, and structural changes designed to transform Skyline's culture from the ground up. Caldwell listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions that suggested genuine engagement rather than performative interest. By the end of their meeting, he had committed to presenting Marcus's proposal to the board with his full endorsement. "This won't be an easy sell to some of our more traditional board members," Caldwell admitted. "They'll see it as an overcorrection or an admission of liability. But I believe it's our only path forward, both morally and financially." As Marcus left the meeting, he felt cautiously optimistic, but knew that corporate promises often evaporated once public attention shifted elsewhere. The real test would be whether Skyline's board would take meaningful action or attempt to manage the crisis with minimal changes. Meanwhile, CEO Thomas Williams was fighting for his professional survival. Having finally recognized the existential threat to his position, he had assembled a team of crisis management consultants and public relations specialists to help him navigate the upcoming board meeting. "The key is to acknowledge concerns while maintaining that we've been unfairly targeted," advised one consultant. "Position yourself as the leader who can guide the company through this challenging period with moderate reforms that don't disrupt operations." "And if the board pushes for more dramatic changes?" Williams asked. "Remind them of the potential liability implications of admitting systematic discrimination," suggested the legal advisor. "Frame it as opening the floodgates to lawsuits that could bankrupt the company." This defensive strategy reflected the fundamental misunderstanding that had characterized Williams's approach from the beginning, viewing the situation as a PR problem to be managed rather than a legitimate moral and operational failure requiring correction. As the board meeting approached, Skyline's stock had lost nearly $700 million in value, reducing the company's market capitalization by almost 40%. Multiple institutional investors had issued statements expressing concern about leadership and governance, with several large shareholders threatening to follow Pioneer's lead in divesting if significant changes weren't implemented. The night before the board vote, Marcus received threats from anonymous sources, messages filled with racial slurs and warnings to stop attacking American businesses or face consequences. While such intimidation tactics were disturbing, they only reinforced his conviction that the fight for accountability was necessary and urgent. "They're scared," Elena observed as they reported the threats to law enforcement. "When systems of power are truly threatened, this is how they respond, with intimidation and attempts to silence." "It won't work," Marcus replied, his military training having prepared him for far more dangerous confrontations than anonymous threats. "If anything, it confirms we're on the right track." The day of the decisive board meeting dawned with protesters gathered outside Skyline headquarters in Chicago. A diverse coalition of civil rights organizations, veteran groups, and former passengers sharing their own stories of discrimination. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing aerial footage of the growing crowd as national media covered the unfolding corporate drama as both a business story and a social justice watershed. Inside the building's executive suite, the Skyline Board of Directors convened for what would become a pivotal moment in the company's history. The meeting, scheduled for 2 hours, stretched to more than 6 as directors engaged in heated debate over the company's future direction. Thomas Williams presented his case for maintaining current leadership with moderate reforms, warning of financial and legal risks if the company appeared to admit systematic wrongdoing. Robert Caldwell countered with Marcus's comprehensive proposal, arguing that only radical transparency and meaningful change could restore trust, repair the company's reputation, and ultimately rebuild shareholder value. The debate revealed deep divisions within the board regarding corporate responsibility, risk management, and ethical leadership. Some directors prioritized short-term financial protection, while others recognized that the company's survival required addressing the root causes of the crisis rather than its symptoms. As stock trading was temporarily halted again after dropping to another historic low, the board reached its decision moment. The vote was scheduled, the tensions high as each director registered their position on the complex set of proposals before them. The outcome would determine not just the future of Skyline Airlines, but would send a powerful message about corporate accountability in the face of documented discrimination. A message that would resonate far beyond one company or industry. At precisely 2:47 p.m. Central Time, as protesters chanted outside Skyline headquarters and investors anxiously awaited news, the board of directors registered their final vote, 7-3 in favor of accepting Marcus Washington's reform proposal with minor modifications. Among the dissenters was CEO Thomas Williams, who immediately submitted his resignation in protest. Board chairman Robert Caldwell emerged from the boardroom ashen-faced but resolute. Without waiting for the communications team to craft a carefully worded statement, he addressed the assembled executive staff directly. The board has voted to implement comprehensive cultural and policy reforms effective immediately. Thomas Williams has resigned as CEO. I will serve as interim chief executive while we conduct a search for new leadership aligned with our renewed commitment to excellence, accountability, and respect for all passengers and employees. The news traveled at digital speed, reaching Marcus in Atlanta within minutes via multiple text messages and calls. Stock trading resumed with unexpected results. After an initial dip, Skyline shares stabilized and then began a modest recovery, as investors responded positively to the decisive action and clear direction. For Marcus, the board's decision represented not victory, but the beginning of genuine accountability. The real work of transformation lay ahead, and he remained cautiously optimistic about Skyline's commitment to meaningful change. That evening, Caldwell held a press conference announcing specific measures the company would immediately implement. Effective today, Victoria Reynolds and Patricia Miller have been terminated following our internal investigation, which substantiated the allegations regarding their conduct toward Colonel Washington and revealed other concerning incidents. We are establishing an independent oversight committee with real authority to monitor compliance with anti-discrimination policies and review passenger complaints. We've invited Colonel Washington to serve as a consultant in developing this committee's structure and authority. We're implementing industry-leading diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives throughout our organization, with transparent metrics and accountability at every level. Most importantly, we are acknowledging that what happened to Colonel Washington was not an isolated incident, but indicative of broader cultural issues that we failed to address. For that institutional failure, I apologize unreservedly. V.S. Candor of Caldwell's statement, particularly his admission of systemic problems rather than blaming individual employees, signaled a significant shift in corporate approach. While skeptics questioned whether these commitments would translate into meaningful action once public attention shifted elsewhere, the specific nature of the announced measures and the involvement of independent oversight suggested genuine intent. In the days that followed, Skyline announced a partnership with several veterans organizations to develop specialized training programs for airline staff. The company committed to regular public reporting of discrimination complaints and their resolutions with independent verification of the data. For Marcus, the response to his campaign for accountability was multifaceted. He received thousands of messages of support from people sharing their own experiences of discrimination in travel and other contexts. Military organizations honored his advocacy as an extension of his service. Civil rights leaders recognized his strategic approach to corporate accountability as a model for effective advocacy. But there was also backlash. Conservative media outlets portrayed him as an opportunist, using one unfortunate incident to damage an American business. Online trolls circulated fabricated stories questioning his military record or alleging financial motives for his actions. A fringe group even staged a small boycott of military support organizations that had allied with Marcus's cause. Elena's law firm received anonymous threats for representing Marcus, though these only strengthened the partner's resolve to support her work. The family's home address was published online by extremist groups, necessitating security precautions and coordination with local police. Throughout this turbulent period, the Washington family remained a united front. Zoe and Tyler, initially shielded from the worst of the backlash, now insisted on being fully informed and involved in the family's response. "This is our fight too, Dad," Zoe declared during a family meeting to discuss security concerns. "What happened to you affects all of us, and how we respond to it says something about who we are as a family. Tyler, whose social media savvy had proven invaluable in managing Marcus's public platform, added, "Besides, the trolls are losing. For every negative comment, there are hundreds of supportive ones. People recognize truth when they see it." While, Marcus had never sought the spotlight, he recognized his responsibility to use his platform effectively now that circumstances had thrust him into public view. He carefully selected speaking engagements that allowed him to frame the conversation around systematic reform rather than personal grievance, consistently redirecting attention to the broader coalition of advocates who had been fighting for accountability long before his incident. Jeffrey Wilson, the flight attendant who had attempted to de-escalate the original confrontation, contacted Marcus to express support and share additional information about Skyline's internal culture. Under the company's new leadership, Jeffrey was promoted to a training role, developing protocols for conflict resolution and cultural sensitivity. Martha Gladwell, the retired teacher who had defended Marcus on the flight, was invited to join Skyline's newly formed customer advisory board, where her perspective as both a witness to discrimination and an advocate for accountability provided valuable insights to the reform process. 1 month after the board's decisive vote, Skyline formally introduced its transformed complaint procedure, designed with input from Elena's law firm and administered with oversight from an independent committee that included civil rights experts, customer advocates, and industry professionals. The reformed system addressed a critical flaw in the previous approach. Complaints had been handled internally by managers with direct incentives to minimize problems and avoid costly remedies. The new procedure included third-party review, transparent tracking, and accountability metrics tied to executive compensation. As these structural changes took shape, Marcus struggled with his sudden prominence, maintaining focus on systematic change rather than personal celebrity. He declined numerous offers to commercialize his experience, book deals, speaking tours, reality TV appearances, choosing instead to channel attention toward the coalition of advocates working for industry-wide reforms. "This was never about me," he repeatedly told journalists seeking personal narratives. "It's about addressing patterns of discrimination that affect countless travelers who don't have medals or media attention to leverage for accountability." Darnell's investment firm, recognizing positive indicators in Skyline's reform efforts, increased its stake in the company, betting on successful transformation to restore and eventually enhance shareholder value. This vote of confidence from a sophisticated financial player helped stabilize the airline's stock price, creating breathing room for the difficult work of cultural change. Skyline employees, initially fearful that the crisis would lead to layoffs or even bankruptcy, gradually embraced the reform process as new leadership demonstrated genuine commitment to improvement. Internal surveys revealed increasing trust in management and greater willingness to report problems without fear of retaliation. 3 months after the incident, Victoria Reynolds gave an interview to a major news magazine, having reflected on her actions during her unemployment. While she stopped short of a full apology, she acknowledged for the first time that implicit biases had influenced her behavior throughout her career. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced," she admitted. "But looking back at patterns in how I treated different passengers, I can see now that I made assumptions based on appearance that I shouldn't have made. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it helps explain how someone can perpetuate discrimination without consciously intending to." This rare moment of public self-reflection from someone at the center of a discrimination incident added valuable nuance to the national conversation about bias, accountability, and reform. Meanwhile, the young black boy who had witnessed Marcus's humiliation on the plane and later exchanged a salute with him made contact through his mother. 11-year-old Devin Jackson wrote a school essay about the incident that had gone viral in educational circles. "When I saw how Colonel Washington was treated, I felt scared and angry," Devin wrote. "But when I saw how he responded, with dignity and determination instead of giving up or lashing out, I learned something important about standing up for what's right. He fought against unfairness not just for himself, but for everyone who's ever been disrespected because of how they look." Marcus arranged to meet Devin and his mother, recognizing the profound impact that witnessing both discrimination and resistance can have on a young person's development. Their conversation focused not on the injury, but on the response. How systematic change requires strategic thinking, coalition building, and persistence. By the 6-month mark, Skyline's transformation had become a case study in corporate crisis management and ethical leadership. Business schools incorporated the incident and its aftermath into their curricula, analyzing both the failures that created the crisis and the response that ultimately turned it into an opportunity for meaningful reform. The congressional hearing had spurred legislation addressing discrimination in transportation, with bipartisan support for measures requiring transparent reporting of incidents and standardized training for customer-facing staff. The proposed bill, informally known as the Washington Act in reference to Marcus, represented a rare moment of political unity around principles of fair treatment and accountability. For Marcus Washington, who had spent his military career serving with quiet excellence rather than public recognition, the unexpected role of catalyst for corporate accountability brought both responsibility and opportunity. As he prepared for the 6-month anniversary of the incident that had altered the trajectory of his post-military life, he reflected on the meaning of service in this new context. The battle he had fought wasn't against one airline or two discriminatory employees, but against systems that enabled and protected discrimination while silencing those affected by it. It was, in many ways, an extension of the oath he had taken decades earlier to defend American principles. Principles that included dignity, justice, and equal treatment under the law. The changes he had helped create at Skyline Airlines were beginning to ripple outward, influencing practices across the industry and even into other sectors where customer service intersected with issues of race and bias. While much work remained, the foundation for meaningful reform had been laid. As Marcus reviewed talking points for an upcoming interview marking the 6-month milestone, he focused not on what had been accomplished, but on what still needed to be done. True to his military training, he understood that initial victories must be consolidated through consistent follow-through and vigilant oversight. The battle for accountability wasn't over. In many ways, it had just begun. But the corporate reckoning triggered by one flight attendant's discriminatory actions and one passenger's refusal to accept injustice had fundamentally altered the landscape in which that battle would be fought. And for all the complexity of the journey, one simple truth remained at its core. Dignity was not a privilege to be granted or withheld based on race, rank, or circumstance. It was a fundamental right. One, worth fighting for regardless of the cost. 6 months to the day after Victoria Reynolds pushed Marcus Washington and called him boy on Skyline Airlines Flight 372, Marcus stood before a graduating class of flight attendants at the company's newly established training academy in Atlanta. The auditorium was filled with diverse faces, a visual representation of the airline's commitment to building a workforce that reflected the passengers it served. Your role goes beyond safety demonstrations and beverage service, Marcus told the attentive trainees. You are the human face of this company, the frontline representatives who shape each passenger's experience. How you treat people, all people, regardless of appearance, accent, or attire, defines not just this airline but our collective progress toward a more equitable society. The training program these new employees had completed was dramatically different from the one their predecessors had experienced. Extensive cultural competency modules, conflict resolution techniques, and historical context about discrimination in transportation had been integrated into every aspect of their preparation. Among the standard airline procedures and safety protocols, they had studied actual case scenarios, including Marcus's experience, analyzing what went wrong and how different approaches could have prevented escalation. They had participated in immersive role-playing exercises designed to build empathy and recognition of implicit biases. Most significantly, they had learned about Skyline's transformed accountability systems, which now included clear reporting, mechanisms for discriminatory behavior, protection for employees who identified problems, and consistent consequences for violations regardless of tenure or position. As Marcus concluded his address, Skyline's new CEO, Vanessa Rodriguez, joined him on stage. A highly respected aviation executive with a background in organizational psychology, Rodriguez had been unanimously selected by the board after an extensive search for leadership aligned with the company's reformed values. Colonel Washington's Presence today represents more than a successful resolution to an unfortunate incident, Rodriguez told the graduating class. It symbolizes our commitment to learning from past failures and building a culture where dignity and respect are non-negotiable. Priorities. The transformation she referenced extended far beyond training programs and public statements. Under Rodriguez's leadership and with ongoing consultation from Marcus and the Independent Oversight Committee, Skyline had implemented structural changes throughout its operations. Every customer complaint now triggered a standardized review process with third-party verification to prevent the dismissal of legitimate concerns. Hiring and promotion decisions were evaluated through new metrics designed to eliminate historical patterns of discrimination. Executive compensation was partially tied to measurable improvements in diverse representation and inclusion metrics. Anonymous reporting channels allowed employees to identify problematic behaviors without fear of retaliation. These changes had required significant investment, but the financial results suggested the approach was working. Skyline's stock had recovered most of its losses, stabilizing with new investor confidence in the reformed leadership and governance structure. The company now led the industry in diversity metrics and had shown steady improvement in customer satisfaction scores across all demographic groups. What had begun as a crisis management effort had evolved into a legitimate competitive advantage, as travelers increasingly considered corporate values in their purchasing decisions. After the graduation ceremony, Marcus met privately with Victoria Reynolds at her request. Their first direct interaction since the incident that had transformed both their lives in unexpected ways. Now working for a budget carrier after months of unemployment, Victoria appeared markedly different from the confrontational flight attendant who had dismissed Marcus's humanity with a casual slur. The experience of public accountability, professional consequences, and personal reflection had clearly affected her deeply. "I want to apologize," she began, struggling to maintain eye contact. "What I did was inexcusable. I've spent months trying to understand why I acted that way, and while I can identify factors, stress, poor training, personal problems, none of them justify how I treated you." Marcus listened attentively, neither absolving her of responsibility nor expressing lingering resentment. His interest was not in Victoria's discomfort, but in genuine understanding that might prevent similar incidents in the future. "What have you learned from this experience?" he asked when she finished her apology. Victoria considered the question carefully. "I've learned that what I thought were just moments of impatience or irritation were actually expressions of biases I didn't recognize in myself. I've learned how quickly those biases can escalate to dehumanizing behavior when they're not acknowledged and addressed. And I've learned that accountability, painful as it is, can lead to necessary growth." Her response suggested a level of self-reflection that Marcus found encouraging, not for Victoria's personal redemption, but for the broader implications of individual change multiplied across systems and institutions. Later that day, another meaningful reunion occurred when Devin Jackson, the young boy who had witnessed the original incident, visited Skyline's headquarters with his mother as Marcus's special guests. Now 12 years old, Devin had continued following the story of corporate transformation that his school essay had helped humanize. "I'm applying to aviation camp this summer," Devin told Marcus excitedly as they toured the facility. "I want to be a pilot someday. What happened on that plane made me nervous about flying at first, but seeing all the changes because of you made me realize I could be part of making things better." The comment captured what Marcus found most meaningful about the unexpected journey of the past 6 months, the transformation of a humiliating experience into a catalyst for positive change that would benefit countless others. This sentiment was further reinforced when Robert Caldwell, who had stepped down as Skyline's chairman after overseeing the leadership transition, met with Marcus to reflect on the company's evolution. "When this crisis began, I viewed it primarily as a threat to shareholder value," Caldwell admitted. "I was focused on containing damage rather than addressing causes. You forced us to recognize that genuine accountability wasn't just morally right but economically necessary for our survival." Indeed, Skyline's transformation had become a case study taught in business schools across the country, analyzing both the catastrophic failure of the company's initial response and the remarkably effective turnaround achieved through transparent accountability and structural reform. The congressional legislation inspired by Marcus's experience, now formally titled the Transportation Equity and Accountability Act, was proceeding through committee with strong bipartisan support, signaling rare political consensus around principles of fair treatment and corporate responsibility. Marcus's decision to decline financial settlement in favor of systematic reform had established a powerful precedent for addressing discrimination through institutional change rather than individual compensation. The approach had inspired similar advocacy in other sectors, from healthcare to financial services, where patterns of bias affected customer experiences and outcomes. Elena's law firm, recognized for its pivotal role in Skyline's transformation, had established a specialized practice focused on corporate accountability and inclusion, helping other companies proactively address cultural issues before they escalated into public crises. The Accountability in Aviation Coalition had grown into a respected advocacy organization, with representatives serving on federal advisory committees and industry working groups developing best practices for preventing discrimination in travel. As for Marcus himself, the transition from military leadership to civilian influence had been more complex and public than he had ever anticipated. The Distinguished Service Medal that had brought him to Washington, D.C. on that fateful day now shared shelf space with civilian honors recognizing his contribution to corporate accountability and transportation equity. More meaningful than any award, however, was the transformation he had witnessed in his children's understanding of civic engagement and strategic advocacy. Zoe and Tyler had observed firsthand how principled resistance to injustice, when approached with strategic thinking and coalition building, could create lasting change in systems previously resistant to reform. "What I'm most proud of," Marcus told Elena as they prepared for a celebration marking Skyline's successful transformation, "is that we never made this about punishment or revenge. We focused on systematic improvement that would benefit everyone, passengers, employees, even shareholders in the long run." Elena smiled, remembering the late-night strategy sessions and difficult decisions that had characterized their journey. "That's what made it effective. You approached corporate accountability the way you approached military leadership, with clarity of purpose, strategic thinking, and fundamental respect for human dignity." The Skyline Airlines that existed 6 months after the incident bore little resemblance to the company where Victoria Reynolds had pushed a black veteran with impunity. From leadership to training to accountability systems, the transformation had been comprehensive and measurable. But the most significant change wasn't captured in policy documents or organizational charts. It was reflected in the experiences of passengers like Marcus Washington, who could now board planes with the expectation of being treated with basic dignity, regardless of their race, religion, or appearance. It was reflected in the confidence of employees who knew they could report problems without fear of retaliation. It was reflected in the pride of new hires like those Marcus had addressed at the graduation ceremony, joining a company committed to learning from past failures rather than denying or repeating them. As Marcus prepared to board a Skyline flight for the first time since the incident, a symbolic journey marking both personal closure and corporate transformation, he reflected on the power of strategic advocacy to create change that extended far beyond one person's experience. The flight attendant who greeted him at the cabin door represented the new Skyline, professionally trained, culturally competent, and committed to treating every passenger with equal respect and dignity. "Welcome aboard, Colonel Washington," she said with genuine warmth. "Thank you for your service, both in uniform and in helping transform our airline." The simple greeting represented everything Marcus had fought for. Not special treatment or personal vindication, but the basic dignity and respect that should be afforded to every passenger regardless of appearance or background. As he settled into his seat, Marcus noticed a young black family being welcomed with the same professional courtesy he had received. The parents, probably around his age, were traveling with 2 children who appeared excited about their journey. In that ordinary moment of equitable treatment, unremarkable except when contrasted with historical patterns of discrimination, Marcus saw the true value of the battle he had waged. Not in headlines or stock prices or personal recognition, but in the quiet dignity of people being treated as people, without the additional burden of bias or prejudice. The journey had been more public and consequential than he ever could have imagined when he boarded that flight from Washington, D.C. 6 months earlier. What began with a push and a slur had catalyzed a $700 million stock crash and ultimately a corporate transformation that would benefit countless travelers for years to come. But for Marcus Washington, the measure of success wasn't financial impact or media attention. It was the knowledge that his resistance to injustice had helped create space for others to travel with dignity. A different kind of service to his country, but one no less meaningful than the uniform he had worn with pride for 20 years. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination in a public space? Would you stand up like Marcus did, even knowing the challenges ahead? Comment your thoughts below, hit the like button. If this story inspired you to consider how one person's principled stand can create lasting change, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for dignity matters, even when it's difficult. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve. Marcus Washington's journey teaches us that real change requires strategic action, not just righteous anger. When faced with discrimination, he didn't simply vent his frustrations. He methodically built a coalition of support, gathered evidence, and targeted pressure points that would force accountability. This story demonstrates how systems protect themselves until the cost of continuing harmful practices exceeds the cost of transformation. Skyline initially dismissed Marcus's complaint, following the standard corporate playbook of denial and minimization. Only when the financial, reputational, and legal consequences became severe did meaningful change become possible. The most powerful lesson is that individual dignity and systematic accountability are interconnected. By refusing to accept personal humiliation as just how things are, Marcus created space for others to demand better treatment too. His decision to prioritize structural reform over personal compensation transformed a private injury into public progress. We also learned that transformation requires persistence. The $700 million stock crash was just the beginning. The real work happened in the careful reconstruction of policies, training, and accountability systems that followed. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that standing up against discrimination isn't just about the individual incident, but about changing the conditions that allow such incidents to occur repeatedly. One person's principled stand, approached strategically and supported by allies, can create ripples that eventually transform entire systems. What moments of discrimination have you witnessed where someone should have spoken up? Would you have the courage to stand firm like Marcus if faced with similar treatment, even knowing the challenges ahead? Comment below with a time you stood up against unfair treatment or wish you had. Hit the like button if this story inspired you to recognize how one person's principled stand can create lasting change. And subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of courage and transformation. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for dignity matters, even when it's difficult. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve, regardless of their race or background. Thank you for joining us on this journey of justice and transformation. Remember, change begins with individuals, brave enough to say, "This is not acceptable," and strategic enough to make that statement matter.